I'm the Director of Academic Technology at CO Online in the Office of Information Technology.
Cool, thanks. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed for this class project. I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you guys do and how you said that your approach to project management is a little non-traditional in some ways. I'm really interested to hear how you would describe it.
Yeah, in the software world, there's been several kind of iterations of stuff, and you'll hear most software development shops now say they work in the agile model.
Mm-hmm.
And agile is not unmanaged, but it really sort of reflects the fact that small teams working iteratively on concise tasks kind of makes better software.
Mm-hmm.
While I never explicitly modeled agile, for the most part, I've tried to scope the projects so that they could be achieved by small teams. And usually, I mean, a small team could be, one or two people. Even on a bigger project, it might be 3 or 4 people, kind of the core team, and then sort of support people. And when you run really small teams like that, loading something like project up doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
It creates an enormous amount of apparent structure that then really doesn't necessarily guide you. Now, again, I want to put some caveats around this because it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're building a house, for example, and there really is an order that things have to go in, and time is of the essence, and you can't just wait and see when the carpenter's done to call the electrician. I think project management software makes a lot more sense, but in these kind of more fluid environments that I work in terms of like software implementation and configuration and training, there's a lot of complexity that's not apparent up front.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I like to keep things really open. So I'll give you a quick example. When we implemented Canvas, we actually, and I'm going to skip the whole selection process. Once we knew we were going to work Canvas, we were going to retire Blackboard and eCollege. So we had 2 systems that was replacing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a ton of work. I mean, all of our online courses were on the systems. I mean, the vast majority of our faculty used it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a ton of stuff that had to be done. And there were a lot of people involved in that, but the core team was myself and 3 other people.
Okay.
Actually used to run that. And by the way, it also had some really hard deadlines. It's like certain things had to be done before the semester started so that people could log in and get their classes, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I mean, many people were involved in this project, but the 4 kind of core people, we tracked the whole thing in this tool called Trello. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't used it, but
it's a really neat and simple list management software. And so, and I'll still this day when I talk about the Canvas migration, I always joke, guess which project management tool we use? And the answer is we didn't use one. We would meet, pretty much daily, and we would go through the Trello lists. And the nice thing with the Trello lists are, if something came up that needed to be done, they'd put it on a list. And the lists are all broken down by, subject matter, was it a training thing? Was it a configuration thing? Was it a, whatever. And so we just kept punching off the things on the list. And so there was a certain priority to things, but for the most part, everyone on the team knew what the priorities were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, so I think that managing that way, and by the way, it was a huge success. We met or exceeded every benchmark we set for ourselves in terms of timelines and cost and everything.
That's awesome.
To a certain extent, it's not like, it was just like, whoa, it's all completely crazy. From the more professional project management crowd, it probably looked like that. But, at the end of the day, money talks. I mean, we saved, I set aside $500,000 for that conversion, and we ended up spending less than 100 of it.
Oh my gosh.
Just didn't need it. I had little boxes on things for hiring casts of thousands to help manage stuff, and we just didn't need it. The problems didn't arise. So so it's good to have all that contingency. But my point is like when I talk about this kind of more agile approach to project management, my heart's really in it, because I think that smart people that have clear goals and enough resources don't need a Pareto chart to tell them,
mm-hmm.
today I have to do X, Y, and Z. So
well, what I think is also interesting too is the idea of, I mean, we've talked some about this in the class, but the idea of managing versus leading. And it sounds to me like what you're talking about is that there's a limit to what managing can accomplish, and maybe what you're trying to do is create a system where people can lead more effectively.
I think that's fair. I mean, another big kind of component of my whole kind of leadership, world view is this guy Dennis Kenlaw, and he wrote a book called Coaching for Commitment. And Kenlaw's basic thesis is you can have compliance from employees, or you can have commitment. And employees will comply; they will do what you said, but they will only do what you said. And when it's 5 o'clock, they will go home, right? And it's a culture of, well, that's not my job. He said committed employees are like so much more productive. They quote, in a sense, don't go home at 5 if the job's not done, because the job matters. They'll always reach out to help somebody else because, and so he had these elements that he thought how you would coach employees for commitment. And I won't go into all of that, but it's the same basic idea, which is to say this isn't just, some sort of like lifestyle choice. It's really about organizations function a lot better when the people in the organization know what's going on and have the resources to get things done.
I mean, would you consider your unit an example of a learning organization? It sounds like you might. And what have you guys done that might facilitate?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I've never used that term, but I'm sort of vaguely familiar with it. A couple of things come to mind. I mean, the first thing is I'll tell you is you kind of have to keep challenging people. And again, if you look back to this idea of I want talented individual contributors, I'm kind of recruiting from this nutty bunch of people that don't want a desk job. They don't want to just sit down and do the same thing every day, right? And those people are fun and they're awesome and they're really good, but they're also like, they're like wild animals. They get bored,
Right.
And so, so you kind of have to keep feeding them new and interesting work. Well, I tell you what, you have to go through periods of maintenance. It's like after you implemented Canvas, I mean, those guys nailed it. I mean, I've never worked with a better team that had more success, but now my commando team is, basically back on base. Make your bed, march.
Right.
And they're like, this sucks. Like, we want to go blow something up. But I think that, the idea of a learning organization is very appealing, but the friction on the other side is that you've got to find a way to continually reset what you're doing to keep them engaged. So, I can't say, I want you to spend this year, going hard and migrating to a single LMS. And then I want you to spend the whole next year just, making sure it's running, just doing the same trainings over and over again, because you're kind of like, it's almost like you feel like you need two different sets of people to do that. So I think that in order to be a learning organization, so to speak, you kind of have to keep resetting what you're doing, and you have to kind of find ways to make sure you're doing the maintenance while you continually excite people about the next thing. Another challenge with that kind of learning organization, especially any kind of high impact organization, is that excellence becomes the new norm, And in some sense it's hard because everyone's already forgotten how crappy it was to have 2 LMSs. They have 1. But now that's just de facto. We earn the praise and the credit for that, but now it's just kind of like, what it doesn't do. It's not, so people have short memories. So part of that resetting, I think, is also necessary because you can't let your excellence becomes the next, you become your own worst enemy. You become, your own bar. There was something else I was going to say too about this that I think, I know, is something I've done to kind of try to do with individuals I have this sort of philosophy that says, if you work for me, there's job number 1 that you have to do. And there's the job that is your job. Like in our case, job number 1 is, I joke, it's answering the phone, right? You're supporting faculty or students, or you should never tell someone you can't fix a problem or help a faculty member unless you're already fixing a problem or helping a faculty member. But since that's not evenly distributed, there's lots of time when you're not doing anything. And I try to have this idea like special projects, and the definition of a special project is something that's important to the organization. It's something that you personally want to do, and it's something that will develop skills in you that will eventually make it so I can't afford to pay you what you're worth. And this is my kind of like Deadwood antidote. I'm like, I don't want to work with people who think they can't work at another place. I don't want to work with people who think that they've gone as far in their career as they can go. I don't want to work with those people. I don't want them on my team. I don't want them around. And because to me, that's a kind of a point in your life of where you're defeated and you don't care and you stop learning and you stop developing. And so I work really, really hard to make sure that, my team feels like, I'm learning new things. I'm experiencing new challenges. I'm getting better at what I want to get better at.
Yeah.
And that is a crazy balancing act because, like everybody can't do all the fun stuff, but I think that's part of how you do it. And you'll hear me talk a million times, and it doesn't matter how long I ever, how far I go in an organization. It's always going to be about the individuals. It's never about the collective. I mean, the collective is an incredibly powerful thing that results from the individuals, but you got to take care of all the individuals. I'll tell you one other thing I think that might be like helpful when you think about this, because there's the saying, it's like culture is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. And that's true. I mean, as I am in organizations longer and longer, it's amazingly true. But it's like every industry has its own culture, And I remember once that I went on a tour of Boeing. I was hired for the phone company, and walked into the office supply room, right? And there's a table, and on the table there's a stapler and a hole punch and scissors, but there's tape where each thing goes on this table.
Oh, wow. So they can fit it.
Yeah. And I was just like, I'm like, wow, that's really weird. You guys are really organized. And the guy who's giving the tour, he goes, we're engineers, right? And the more I talked to them, I started to realize it's like Boeing wasn't an engineering company in the sense that they made airplanes. They were an engineering company in the sense that they were engineers. Like the company itself was like a giant engineer that wanted order and precision and and so and then a year later I was at United, and I was actually applying for a job, but this old salty guy sits down and he says, there's two things you need to know about the airline. First thing is all the money spent near the customer, that means the planes. And so this is a corporate headquarters for United Airlines, and it was a dump. I mean, I'm telling you, it was a dump. This is well after the time when their voicemail was in common use in businesses. They had answering machines, tape answering machines on their desk. So he's trying to explain to me, he's like, life in the corporate headquarters ain't grand.
Pretty, yeah.
Spent by the airplane. The other thing he says you need to know is, he says, airlines are run by operations people. And he says, operations people don't believe in planning, because one storm over Chicago and the whole thing goes to hell, So he says everything in the airline is reactive. They react, right? I ended up going to work for them. But the reason I'm giving you those kind of stories is because when you look at the leading in learning industries, they have a culture, and I think that it's important to think about what it's like to be a leader in K-12 or what it's like to be a leader in higher ed, because it's different. And I have watched unfolding disasters where they've brought in people from outside that are process experts or business management experts, and it collides. They don't understand, they assume that an efficiency expert from Boeing would be useful to higher ed in the same way that my nutty way of doing things would be helpful to a Boeing division. You kind of have to respect that the leadership. So the leadership style I'm expressing in a certain sense is not only personal to me, but it's also very much what I think works in higher ed.
Right.
I think the very matrix, shared resourcing, shared governance, transparent, open, I think all those kinds of things, and a decent respect for individuals is just higher ed. So I think you got to look at that, and I don't know, if you went and worked in K-12, there's some different things there. You have parents. All of a sudden, your customer has this other thing attached to them they're accountable to, and you got little kids, and so certain kinds of habits and behaviors and ways of thinking and being are going to be different. And so that'd be the only thing I would tell you as you think about it. You can't pull leadership off the book and be a leader. I think you have to be a leader of something. I shouldn't be commanding Army units.